here. Well, welcome everybody to our February Stories Lab, Stories in Organization Lab that we give every month. And it's my pleasure for us to welcome my colleague Artem, as well as our special guest, Eamon O'Brien. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Artem, to take it away.
It's not for long because our guest sure does know how to speak for himself. So my name is Artem. I'm responsible for inviting people in for our monthly story labs. And I actually met Eamon when we were getting ready for the conference last year. And we did a beautiful chit chat. And he was actually the man behind the name Storyfy Your Leadership Conference with his advice, like what promise he wanted to make. But enough about that. What I liked about Eamon was his pure interest into different techniques of doing storytelling. He is by himself Europe's leading authority in strategic storytelling and the founder of Reluctant Speaker Club, like the place where leaders learn how to use storytelling for good. And what's more interesting is that for quite some time now, Eamon has been conducting a series of interviews with storytellers for his research about how to tell stories purposefully and strategically. So that's why we're here. And Eamon has graciously agreed to share with us his insights that he's gathered over the course of the interviews. So Eamon, take it over from here. It's so great to see you again. Lovely that you're here.
Oh, well, listen, it's my pleasure. And it's wonderful to be amongst my tribe, to have such a collection of passionate, skilled storytellers. It will be a fun day today. And what I thought I might do that you might find useful is to really just focus today on the power of signature stories and creating signature stories that have high impact. And this is really about not just sharing stories that delight, but causing your stories to be more transformative. The idea is to share stories that cause people to think differently and then to change their behavior. And particularly if you want to be paid cash money by event organizers who think that your ideas are rather splendid, and we'd love to have you come on board and maybe do something from a corporate perspective, thinking about how you increase the value, how you increase something to have a greater lasting effect, I suppose. So the idea is that people don't just remember what you say for days or weeks. How about months, or better still, years? Would that be a good plan?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Now, one thing I will ask you to do, and I'll explain why later on, is I would quite like you to leave your mics on because I want to hear your reactions. Or if you don't react, that's all right too. But I do want to hear as we go along here. And what I want to do today is to have a look at looking behind the scenes at signature stories in terms of how you actually source these things, how you hone these, how you make them applicable and work in different cultures and different environments. So I'll get a bit international as we go down the line as well. But all of this is going to be based on just using ordinary, everyday stories. So I'm going to start with one. So I don't know about you all, but when somebody does something small for me, that's really just very kind, I really appreciate it. And before COVID, I had a client who contacted me and said, Emma, you know, you're supposed to be giving a talk in Manchester in Britain. Yeah, well, we've had to change it last minute. We need to do that in London now. And it's going to be a lot of bother for you. So to make things easier for you, we're just going to organize all your flights for you. And I know you love when you're going to London to fly into London City Airport. And if you know London, essentially, this is the closest thing to London. It's about 20 minutes into the west side. Perfect. Love it. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. So I come over and I have, you know, when you've had just a fabulous day and everybody's on the same wavelength and the energy is fantastic. And then at the end of the day, you are bushed, you're done. And so I get back to London City Airport. I have about 2 hours to go. And I'm just thinking, you know what, you deserve something really nice to eat now. And don't tell anybody, but maybe I might have a sneaky beer. So anyway, I go along to take my little tag to put it on top of the kiosk as I go into the airport. And the next thing I hear is, and I look down and I see a big old X and it says seek assistance. And I think, well, I've done something wrong. So I tried again. I go, seek assistance. So I see there's a woman who's in a kiosk over here to the side. So I said, well, she's probably assistant. So I go over and say, excuse me, this isn't working. Can you help me? And so she grabs this thing and she's looking at it. And then she looks at me and she said, I don't know how to tell you this. This says LHR. That's London Heathrow. You're in LCY. And I say, you've got to be joking me. My clients organized this. Like, you know, I didn't have put my glasses on in the morning. It never even occurred to me to look at this thing. Oh my God, what am I going to do? Can I take a taxi over? And she said, it's rush hour in London. There's no way you'll get over there. Oh my God. But you know what, actually, she said, there's a flight that is going from here to Dublin. It's in about an hour and 20 minutes. This is clearly a full ticket. Go down and talk to the British Airways people. They'll get you sorted. Okay. So I run down the stairs. I find an agent and I say, excuse me, I need to change my ticket. She said, not me. Go over and talk to him, the ticketing guy. So I go over to the ticketing guy and he's like this, typing away. And I just go, no reaction. So I go, still no reaction. And I'm really now, excuse me, I said, and he went like this.
Oh,
and he continued to type. And I said, excuse me, please, I need help. And eventually he looks up at me. It's a bit like, you know, when you go into a bar and the bar person is like right beside you and apparently they can't see you. But anyway, he looks up at me and he goes, hello. Look, I am in a terrible bind. Look, this ticket here, it says LHR. My clients, they made a big mistake this morning. They were supposed to fly me in and out of London City Airport, LCY. I need to get to DUB. There's a flight that comes out of here in an hour and a half, an hour and 20 minutes. Can you get me on that flight? And he looks at this thing and he goes, he looks down at his screen and he said, well, you're in luck. And he says, there is a flight and it's only half full. And I said, oh, thank God. Can you put me on it? It is a full ticket. And he said, sure, there'll just be a change of ticket fee. And I said, okay, you know what? I'm thinking this will be £25, £50. I was an idiot. I should have looked in the morning. Fine, I'll pay it. And he goes, then he looks at me and he says, that will be £465. And I said, you have got to be kidding me. He said, I'm not kidding you. I said, check it again. So he goes, £465, sir. And I just, I'm flabbergasted. And he looks at me, he sees my face and he said, sir, it's not me, it's the system. And you know that little voice in your head, the one you shouldn't listen to? I said, well, I need to speak to this system of yours. And he goes, sir, you cannot speak to my system, but you can speak to my boss, Mike. He's right here. So I said, excuse me. So I'm talking to him and I said, excuse me. And he went like this. And he said, I heard you. In truth, I think the whole airport heard me. And he said, let me look at this. So he looks up and he goes, and then he looks at me and says, actually, my colleague Andy did you a favor. It's normally £492. And I'm thinking, I am not paying these sons of biscuit eaters £465 for that. I don't think even at Christmas have I ever paid more than £150 for a single leg from London to Dublin.
Oh, I have.
And I'm just, I'm in that mood where I'm just not doing this. And I'm thinking, okay, Eamon, my sister lives in Cambridge, which is about an hour and a quarter drive from here. I don't have clients tomorrow. Worst case scenario, I will call her and I'll just spend the weekend in Cambridge and I'll come home sometime over the weekend. And then I'm thinking, Eamon, you know, how long did you live in London? You know that if you can get a tube from the city centre, from Piccadilly Square, Circus, beg your pardon, in London, it's about 45 minutes out to Heathrow on the tube. I think I could almost get here. And then in my head, I decide I'm going to be like the Roadrunner. And I'm like this in my head, except at a certain age, you're not really moving that fast. But in my head, I'm going as fast as my little legs will take me. I am out of that airport. I am up a corridor. I'm up the stairs. And I see that there's a guy who's got a whistle and he's about to blow it. And there's a train about to leave the station. I floor it. And I just get in and the train goes. I'm hyperventilating, of course. And I'm thinking, okay, you're up, you're off, you're running. There's 3 stops before you get to somewhere where you have to get to the Jubilee line. And there's maybe 9 stops or something from that. Come on, you can do this. I get to my station where I have to get off, and children, men, women, young, old, whoever's in my way, they're a blur to me. I am just moving. I get to where I should be and I see there's a train that's physically there. I jump on and I'm like, come on. And then I realize I didn't look to see, was it going the right way?
Oh no, no.
And I get to the next station and I look out and I said, oh, there is a God, thank God. I'm going the right way. Come on, Eamon. This is amazing. So I get to where I should be, which is a place called Green Park, which is closer to the airport than Piccadilly. And it's one of those stations, I don't know if you know London, but it's one of these places where there's actually a huge distance between one place and the other. And so I feel like I've just done the Olympics. 4 minutes of nonstop huffing, puffing, grunting, groaning. I get to the platform, I look up, there's a flashing light. 1 minute to Heathrow, next train. Unbelievable. Come on, Eamon. I'm on the train. Now, it's one of these slow boat things where every minute feels like an hour. But with 42 minutes to go, I have less than 2 stops to go. And I'm thinking, you're going to make it. The train stops.
Oh no.
I don't know why. 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 1 minute, 2, 3, 4 minutes, and a voice comes over the panel. I'm very, very sorry, but we've had a bit of an incident. It looks like this geezer, he's really as drunk as a lord. He's singing his head off. He's lying on the tracks. We've called the police. We expect him to be here in a jiffy, and we do hope this is not inconvenienced. And I'm thinking, great, this is the day that Booze McBoozeface decides he's going to lie on a track. Moments later, they do move him off, and I'm on my way again. I get to Heathrow, and I have 22 minutes to go. I tried to take the elevator, but I can't because there's about 40 tourists, all of them with enormous bags. I'm never getting on this. So I have to take 3 flights of stairs, but it's not 3 flights. It's 3 flights on each flight. I get to the top of this, and I am completely and utterly wrecked. I look for the departure gate, and of course, it's miles away. Not again. Floor it one more time. 17 minutes to go. I get to the little kiosk and I go, it's thinking. Oh, no. Seek assistance. There's a woman beside me and I said, please, look, I've been running nonstop for an hour and a half from London City to get here. I'm in training. Would you let me through? I will make this plane. I'm sorry, I can't. You'll have to go and speak with, who is it? British Airways. Where am I going to find an agent? Around the corner, sir, you'll find somebody. I go around the corner and I see this British agent and he is like this. Babe, love you, babe, home soon. And he looks out at me and I must have been quite the sight. A puddle of sweat. And he goes like this, got an emergency. Back soon. And he said, what's the matter? And I said, I've got this ticket and this lady won't let me through. My flight is leaving in about 16 minutes now. I have to get from London Heathrow to Dublin. I came from London City. It's taken an hour and a half to get here. Can you help me? And he looks at this and he said, well, the good news is your flight is late. It's been pushed back by an hour. Oh, fantastic. But unfortunately, you're no longer on the flight.
Oh, they took you off.
Wait, what now? Because you have to check in an hour, half an hour before the flight. And he looks at me and he sees my face and he just says, you need help. Artemis told me this before. I said, I do need help. So he said, he calls his boss and he said, yeah, so I've got this gentleman here. He's just, yeah, he got here from London City Airport on the tube in an hour and a half. I know, unbelievable. Yeah, his flight, he's missed the cutoff. He's trying to get to Dublin. The flight's been pushed back by an hour. Can I do anything? Yeah, great. And give him a medal too. Yeah. Do that. So he said, no problem, sir. So he starts to go. Out comes a ticket. And I'm back to the lady who's at the security, and and she said, well, you have the luck of the Irish. But the story is not done. Because I get to where the flight should be, and there's nobody there. And it's one of these places where, you know, they don't have the overhead monitor. And I'm just, oh my God. And I'm looking frantically for something, anything to tell me what on earth is going on. I look behind the desk and there's a pilot and he has a little cup of coffee in his hand. And he just looks at me and he said, you look stressed. Where's the flight? Where's the flight to Dublin? Where's the flight to Dublin? He said, relax, sir. I'm flying it. You're early. No, will that make a change? And he said, you know, somebody just gave me this coffee. I haven't had any. You look like you could do with a pick-me-up. Honestly, in that moment, I melted. I got that flight back that evening. But as I did, I was thinking about a number of things. The first thing is that customers make mistakes all the time. The question is, when they do you make their day better or do you make it worse? Because the stories that people encounter reflect on who you are, the experience that they get versus what you intended. Funnily enough, I looked up British Airways lines in their promises to their customers later on, and I saw two things that made me laugh. The first thing is it said, we want to be the carrier of choice for long distance, not so much for short. And the second thing is that they had, we want to give the kind of customer service that others can only aspire to. The problem was they didn't set people up to deliver that.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we as storytellers have to do all the time is we have to think about what was the experience that people got at that time? Was it transformative? Did we make their day better? Did we make it worse? Did they feel better off having encountered us than they did before? Now, let me stop there, because that kind of story I have told now in maybe about 10 different countries. I'm going to step behind the scenes a little bit to get into things that you can learn from this that you might be able to apply to signature stories that you create. Would that be a good plan?
Yes.
Fabulous. Okay. So the first thing is that when it comes to signature stories, one of the things that you have to be very careful about is choosing wisely. One of my favorite movies, one of our family favorite movies, is The Princess Bride. So we want to always choose, have you chosen wisely? And what I mean by that is that sometimes when we have a signature story, maybe we only have one amazing story that we love to tell everywhere we go. And oftentimes it delights audiences and it gets a great reaction. But that does not mean to say that is the signature story that you should share with that particular group. You always have to think Is this story, as you think about the outcome that you want for that audience, going to lend itself to cause people to have the reactions that you want? So I will tell you that maybe at any given point in time, I might have 5, 6, even 10 different signature stories that I will adapt in different times. So for example, for Artem, when I did something for you all, I did something about whiskey because I knew you all knew that I came from Ireland, and I knew that that story would work very well. So the very first question that you always have to ask yourself is this appropriate purpose? Don't try to shoehorn a story into the audience. Start with what is best for the audience. The second thing is, it's very important to the extent that you can, that you want to find personal stories ahead of using other people's stories, because you want greater personal connection. If it's your personal story, it's much easier for you to inject passion in it, to relive that story, to cause your audience to be more excited about it. If I tell you a story today about what happened in Irish politics, for example, not that any of you would really be paying attention to that last week. That's something that anybody else might have heard in the news. And maybe you'll react to it, maybe you won't. But what won't happen is that you won't have the same personal connection to that story, and the gravitas associated with that will be less for you. In fact, sometimes you will find you're competing with other people who've told the same story. Now, a third thing about choice, and this is sometimes for some audiences a little bit of a delicate one, if you like, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. You have to think about comfort zones, both your comfort zone and the audience's comfort zone. Sometimes the big signature stories that we have are still quite raw to you. So I went to an event not so long ago where two of the speakers shared incredibly powerful stories. One was about how a mother nearly lost her child in labor. And the other one was about a terrible abusive situation that this woman managed to escape. And the problem with that was not that these weren't great stories, they were, but they were still emotionally attached to them. And so the audience was paying more attention to how the speaker was feeling in that moment than necessarily what they were taking from it. In other words, you were competing with the experience that you want the audience to have. And ultimately, when you're sharing a story, it is always, always about the audience's perspective. And ideally, what you want to do is you don't want to be necessarily the hero in your story, but you want to give the audience the capacity to take on board that role. So be very, very careful about, I have Artemis heard me saying this before, I have a cousin who's a dentist, and I always congratulate him when he manages to give you an injection and it doesn't hurt. And he always says, Eamon, you have to remember there's a patient attached to the tooth. Well, if you're still terribly attached to your story, just be a little bit careful. Does that make good sense?
Yes,
Wonderful.
sure.
Now, so that's part one. Part two is critically important, and this has to do with the whole transformation side of things. One of the things that you categorically want to avoid is sharing a nice story where people kind of enjoy it in the moment, but they don't really get engaged actively, participatively in the story. And it's important that you do cause that to happen. So in Ireland, we have this thing for years. The same is true in Britain, and it's probably less common for you all in various parts of the United States. But in the olden days, when people would heat water for a shower or a bath, if they didn't have a central heating system, they used to have a thing called an immersion, which is basically a big old water tank. Are you all familiar with this? Well, okay.
From Ireland,
some of you will, some of you won't. But anyway, one of the things that parents will commonly say is, don't leave the immersion on. You'll run up a national debt because it's quite an expensive thing to do. When it comes to sharing stories, I want you to find the immersion. I want you to turn it on. I want you to turn it up, and don't turn it off until you are done. because immersion is incredibly important. And there's three things in particular that you can do to up the impact, the personal impact that each and every person in your audience will feel. The first of those is to start with pulling people into your story as quickly as you can at a personal level. How many of you, if any of you, have ever visited Ireland? Do we have any? You have? Okay. So I know, Julian, you're married to a Dubliner, so not so far from us in the north of Ireland. If you come across people there, the start of a conversation will often go something like this. So, Julian, what is situation? What is the situation? Which is really what stories are going on with you. Well, we want to put the audience into a situation just as quickly as we can. What we want people to do literally within the first 30 to 60 seconds is to get two thoughts in their head. Firstly, to think, this sounds interesting. And secondly, I wonder what's going to happen next. So we want something to happen just as quickly as we can. Have you ever read a book, well, you probably have, that where after 6 or 10 pages, nothing is happening, you just, oh, come here. You know, life's too short. Well, when you're giving a talk, you don't have that. You need the audience to connect as quickly as you can, because guess what they're going to do if that doesn't happen? They're down here and they're not looking at you, they're not connecting with you. So we want people hooked as quickly as we can. So one of the things that I commonly recommend is be careful about not doing a lot of backstory. All the stuff that if only you knew all of this, my goodness, this story would be just marvelous. Robert McKee, the screenwriter, likes to say that it's much better to start late when something is happening to pull the audience in. Well, that's actually pretty good advice. Get to where something is happening as a catalyst in the story just as quickly as you can.
What was that name? What was the name, if I quote that? What was his name?
Robert McKee.
Robert McKay?
Robert McKee, MCKEE. I don't know if he's still going, incidentally. He used to be on the speaking circuit and what have you. But anyway, who knows? We'll get back to that later on. So number one is people need to get them onboarded just as quickly as you can. Number two is that particularly when you want people to get excited about something, you want them to create as much personal investment in your story as you can. So I don't mean a little bit, I mean a lot. So one of the things that you want to think about is how can you up the ante, up the stakes, so that your audience has more to care about, where as they think about the motivation of the characters in your story, that the consequence of whether people do or don't manage to succeed to do whatever they have in their heads becomes greater. You know, if you think again about books that you've read, and particularly thrillers. How many do we have thriller readers here? Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, if the bad guy or gal gets their comeuppance on page 1, are you delighted? No, it's a terrible book. You want stuff to happen so that you get more and more. I want to turn the page. So you want to keep upping the ante. So immersion is very, very important. But now here comes perhaps the most important bit from a commercial perspective. This is what you get paid cash money to do. That is the transference bit. So as I was telling you that story about all the dreadful things that happened as I went from A to B to C, could you see the woman who was helping me with, no, you need to go and find British Airways. Could you see, Mister, I'm typing and I can't see you? Yeah. So it's critically important that people can have two things happen that will cause them to get greater meaning out of a story. The first thing is that if they can see what's going on in the story and they find the story interesting, you cannot help it. You are hardwired to do this. You will automatically start to wonder what's going to happen next. And as soon as you do that, and again, you can't help it, you also will be thinking, what would I do in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what creates visceral meaning. This is where you actually experience the story along with the storyteller. Physically and mentally, there's loads and loads of research, particularly actually in California, Sarah, that has been done in Berkeley and elsewhere on just how much immersion we get once we physically get involved in a story. In fact, I don't know if you've ever had on SIO Professor Cron from LA on. Do you know who she is? She's written books on how we are hardwired for story. But I love, she has this bit of research that she did about why we enjoy thrillers so much. And one of the reasons is because we get to experience danger without being in danger. Don't you love it?
Mm-hmm.
So the more visceral that you can make it, the better. But there's a second thing, and this is critically important. And you could argue that they're both really important, that this is even more important than the first. So as I told you my story of woe as I went from A to B to C, I told you a lot, but I also did not tell you a lot. So for example, I didn't tell you what Mr. Typing and I can't see you looked like. Did you get a picture in your head? When I told you about, babe, love you, could you see that person? What happens in the brain is that as we listen to a story, that we fill in gaps. And this is really important, because if you like that story and I asked you a month from now or 2 months from now, what happened to Eamon when he went to the wrong airport? There's a really good chance that you could tell me, but it will no longer be my version. It will be Artem's version. It will be Sarah's version. It will be Grace's version. It will be all of your different versions, because we want transference. But there's one more thing I want to share with you, and then I'm going to open things up to questions. Has this been helpful so far, Marco?
Oh, wonderful. It's been wonderful. Wonderful.
Good. Okay, well, I'm not done yet, because
It's good.
so you can see here that Eamon got very excited. I'm going to just put a little
Storyboard.
storyboard on this. If you are not somebody who storyboards, can I encourage you to get excited about this? You can see Eamon got hold of a crayon that I had no right to own. I drew all sorts of pictures here that mean something to me, and they mean absolutely nothing to you. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because regardless of the audience that you face, one of the things that storyboarding does is it helps you to see more about what you want the audience to see. The impact of your story is always greater if people can see, feel, and connect to the imagery. Because in your long-term memory, you have no words, none, zero, zip. You only have collections of stories. In fact, everything you do is through the prism of story. I know that you've had Kendall Haven on, who talks a lot about this, but it's critically important. So the more I can immerse you visually in something, the greater the effect. And you can also use this to think about, well, what kind of an audience do I have here? So for example, I know that if I'm sharing that story for US audiences, that putting on slightly amusing British accents tends to go down very, very well. If I'm doing this for an Irish audience, I might, when I'm talking about myself having been an idiot, and you'll have heard this word, Julianne, I might say I was an idiot. Which is the same thing, incidentally. If I am in Germany, I will, you will recognize that the audience will oftentimes, even if their English is very good, still have to translate much of what you're doing. So you have to slow down to let the audience in. And what I want you to take from this are the 4 most important words. If you remembered nothing else from what I say to you today, here are 4 words I would like to engrave on your foreheads. You ready? Let your audience in. If you did nothing else, let your audience in is really, 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 really important. Again, if I was giving the same talk in France, I would especially slow down in scenes where I want people to see what's going on, and I will do a lot of sounds. And so, for example, when I do something like click, click, and you know how it's really so irritating, and I don't know why they have to hit so many buttons in airports, but they do. You go, And sometimes I'll even push that a little bit further. Why? Because I want you immersed in just how annoying it is for that clicking and that sound to really get into your head, because it adds to perhaps the most important word that goes with this: tension. The management of tension, because tension breeds curiosity. And here's the truth, ladies and gentlemen: without curiosity, you will not learn. You will always struggle to change. And that's what we want to do with our stories. Has this been helpful, folks?
Oh,
Yes.
yes, yes, wonderful.
Very much.
Wonderful.
I am all yours for any questions you want to ask me at all.
Absolutely. I just want to make a comment about one thing you said about the power of visuals and how we create them in our head, because a few years back, I had an actor friend present at an organization, and he talked about this very touching moment of leaving one state to go to another, and children at the window waving a neighbor's kids goodbye. And a year or two later, I was working on a story, and I was like, can I borrow that picture? I don't know if it was color or black and white. And he goes, Jules, I never used a picture. That was everything you did in your head. And it was a teachable moment of how our brains paint what we want to see. So your picture, there's nobody on the planet who could relate to this airport story and that nail biting, like, can you make it? So that was your chariots of fire moment for sure. getting to the airport and getting through it and making friends and contacts as you went. So I'm going to step back and see who else has questions. But I just had to say, like, that visual painting and letting your audience fill in the blanks too.
I love that. And
amazing.
Before we hop into that, just maybe I just build on that, because an interesting comment. So my daughter is just started doing art school. So she's becoming an artist in fine art. And she came home the other day and she said that her lecture was talking about Matisse. And how Matisse had said that when he would create art, that it was 50% his job and 50% the audience's job. And I think in story, you could even go 20-80, where you want 80% of it to be the audience creating the story, because it's yours.
Thank you. That's amazing. Who has questions or comments?
I have a comment. I've never seen a storyboard in columns. I really love it. There's so much more that you can, break down that way. And it reminded me when I was teaching gifted and talented children. They were children that really excelled academically. And we were doing some kind of informal testing and so on. Kids all thought in pictures. And I wondered if that helped them succeed better in the school system, or if they grew up that way.
I think that in general, I'm currently writing a new book, which has to do with psychology and neuroscience and story and connection. And one of the things that's very interesting about language and how we learn and everything that goes with this is that your brain is hardwired to do everything really from a sensual perspective, because it's the only thing that causes you to be able to gather and take something from an experience. If you cannot see it, you cannot remember it. And so if you think about kids, from a young age, where, maybe as a parent, you're sharing a story with them, and then they have picture books and, they can maybe read along a word or two and, oh, you missed a bit there. I saw that, Carol. And then they get a bit older and maybe they just have the odd picture. And then eventually, of course, we're big boys and girls and we don't need this. But the truth is, English, French, German, Cantonese, Hindu, Urdu, any of these different languages, none of these things, we basically use symbols in order to create meaning, but these symbols have to mean something. And that is ultimately visual within your brain. And the only way that you can remember something really is through gist. So if I can't visualize it, it's very hard to connect it.
It's interesting, though. I worked with a blind musician, and he's deceased now. But when we'd be in front of an audience, we had very little rehearsals. He maybe heard the stories once or twice, and he was so in tune with what to play for that audience, where to begin, where to end, and where to put the emphasis in the story and everything. And he couldn't see the audience. You know,
Mm.
but
Yeah, it's very interesting.
he could also, I had to help him pick out clothes when we travel because he couldn't see the colors of things, you know, he had to match up stuff. But he could sense certain colors with his hands, like red. He always knew what red was. And how he had been blind since birth. How did he, you know, his brain develop? It was just
Isn't
amazing.
that incredible?
Yeah.
It's amazing what goes on between our two ears.
Mm. I want to take this second to acknowledge that for all of you too, we've been joined by our speaker for next month, Dr. Elaine Gale, who's going to join us for a Women's History Month. So this is her first time joining. So I wanted to make sure I call your name out in the mix and do weigh in with a question or comment, and welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here. I'm having a little trouble with my Zoom, but I'm so glad to join, and it's such a joy to hear all of this exploration of story. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just blown away with Eamon, how succinct you are, how much you got across in such a short time. Because this to me was like the best storytelling course I've had in a long time. There's a lot, very concise, and you know, your organization is admirable.
It's clearly a function of being long in the tooth.
Would you talk
Anyone
about,
else? Like, oh, Sarah, yes.
would you
Sorry.
talk about your books, Eamon?
Sure, yeah. So my first book is called How to Make Powerful Speeches. And so I specialize in working with business leaders to overcome fears of speaking, but also how to connect more effectively. And I work with a lot of senior executives who work with international audiences. So I do a lot of work on cross-cultural connection.
Yeah.
Now, my background is that I spent 25 years in cross-cultural communications. So back in the 90s, I made about 300 commercials in Washington, D.C., in Russian, Polish, Arabic, Hindu, Urdu, all sorts of things. So if you want lashings of funny stories about learning about cultural mistakes, I have them in spades.
So you don't speak all those languages, do you?
No, actually,
You just produced it.
a quick funny story about that. So I was making commercials in about 12 different languages, and I was invited because I worked with MCI. I made lots of commercials for them, and I was invited to go to a French New York Film Society event.
Oh, yeah.
So I lived in France for a year, and my French was pretty good. And I said, wouldn't it be nice in my head if I could maybe speak French and I'm going to do this talk in French. Never given a talk in French in my life. And so I rocked up and I started off at great pace. He said, Mesdames et messieurs, je m'appelle Eamon O'Brien, je suis chef de marketing ici à MCI, et je suis ravi d'être ici, which means that I'm delighted to be here. And then I wanted to say, with you. And all of a sudden, I must have looked crooked at somebody. I lost my place. And I was trying to think, and I could not think, well, what is just with? I mean, like with in French, you've got to be kidding me. And I was thinking, I said, no, that sounds rude. Don't say that. Pardon me. No. And eventually, in my head, this took 2 minutes. It was probably 5 seconds. And I panicked. And I just said, and I am just so delighted to be here with you. And I finished my little talk, and I just felt like I was a complete idiot. What on earth got into your head? So the next day, I meet my boss in Washington, D.C., and he said, how did your speech go? And I said, oh, car crash. I said, I'm such an idiot. I don't know what I was thinking. And he said, Eamon, they loved it. I said, what? He said, they loved it. They couldn't get over how passionate you were. I said, yes, I was. But the point I'm making to you about that story is that, you know, it is not so much about how we feel in the moment, but rather the experience that your audience has in that moment. And we need to get out of our own way sometimes just to encourage people to have a better experience.
I have a question. going back to the storyboard. When you sort of reached down and said, and I'm going to show you something, seeing the way the story had gone, you could have pulled out a rabbit and I wouldn't have been surprised. But when you pulled out a storyboard, it was like, mind blown, right? I said, wow, that's amazing. And I think there's more. Could you describe a little bit how you use them and how you organize them? Because I think there's a little bit more than meets the
I
eye
will
there.
always start with how do you pull people into this story as quickly as you can. So if you think about your audience for any story need context. And most importantly, they need to think about motivation. So what does that look like? Whose motivation is it? And what kicks a story into gear? So that's the very, very first part of it. And I want to get to that as quickly as I can. I want to give you enough, but not too much. And as I said to you earlier on, for God's sake, don't overdo the backstory. Just give people enough, because your audience, you want to give them a job to do. You do not need to carry the load on your back. So that's part one.
The equivalent of the Japanese ink brush painting.
Yes.
And make it be enough.
So basically all on board is the first bit. And as you do this, incidentally, you also want to dwell in moments. So one of the things that you are constantly looking to do is you're trying to cause the audience to stop, to immerse, and to reflect in key scenes. So Stephen King, for example, who wrote a marvelous book on writing, I love that he says that all stories are really about situations and scenes. And that's really what you're doing. You're moving people from one place to the next. And so that's what you want to think about. If somebody was physically and mentally immersed in this moment, what would you want to do to just pull them into this so you're there, you're on board? And I can't overemphasize against the importance of giving people personal immersive issues and challenges that they can care about. There's a speaker that you may have had on before, Doug Stevenson. I'm sure you all know him. He talks a lot about that in particular. Who's talking to me?
Nobody. Somebody needs to mute for a minute, even though we said you can be liberated today. You may want to mute.
Doug's in Colorado Springs.
But one of his favorite phrases is "no stuff, no story," and in other words, no problem, no stories. So in other words, if there's, if I tell you that I put on a few pounds during COVID, and so I had a salad tonight and I'm feeling much better, that falls under the category of your mother be proud of you. There isn't a reason for the audience to give a hoot. So, that's not investment. That's basically, look at me, child. The one, look what I just did. And frankly, nobody cares.
I love what you said about making the audience the hero in the story.
Yes,
I love that.
Really, really important. And it's, one of the things that is critically important. The other thing is that, so the story I told you today, the story, any story I tell, this is always going to be true. It's always true. I never, ever make a thing up. Nothing that you heard today was made up. Zero, zip. But what I do is I slow down in the moment in terms of what was going on, particularly what was going on in my head. Interestingly, there are differences, which I won't get into because frankly, this has been a very lengthy conversation between male and female audiences, and differences from a culture to culture in terms of what people immerse themselves in. But one of the things that works especially well when you have a female, a lot of women in an audience, is that giving just an extra little bit of of detail fills in a lot of extra color and a lot of extra context, and in particular paying attention to what people were thinking in the moment. And I'm always, if I'm going to slow down anywhere, it's when people did something, and in particular when people react. And the reason you want to do that is because that's right there, the bit where people are having the visceral feeling. What would I do in that situation? I can't believe Eamon did that. I can't believe I did much of that, but I did all of it.
But the other thing, you just struck a chord, and we have a couple of minutes that I want to ask you about yourself, is with the advent of Zoom, like when you're working with the room of people, you can watch their body language, their breathing, what's happening in the room, and you can pivot. But with Zoom and some of the delayed audio, you have to always, I think the challenge has been to imagine the beats, how long it's going to take for sound to get to them, take it in, and then react, and not sound like you're just diving forward with the sound. Correct. So it's that whole rhythm. It's been a whole lesson to see, and I'm sure you have readings you can talk to us about on it.
Well, I think actually you've hit a really important point, and that is that on Zoom, and in particular when you have international audiences where English is not their first language, slow the heck down. One of the things that you don't want to do is to squeeze a story into the amount of time that you have. If you hit the accelerator, you're going to lose the audience. You need the audience to be immersed in the story and never to feel rushed. So if I had, like last week, I did a 15-minute talk for a networking group in New York. My story was a 2-minute story. About a near 80-year-old woman who went swimming in ludicrous conditions right beside me here during COVID, and a lesson from that. And another time I might tell you that story. Is pretty funny, but it's a 2-minute story. So in other words, the story should be appropriate to what you want to do with the audience, but it is ultimately about the experience.
Now, I know we have 4 minutes to go because we're mindful of the time. Where can we find you? I know Sarah, when she put the newsletter out, she has your links. Is there anything else you'd like to drop into the chat for us to know and find you?
Sure, yes. So a book that I wrote is this one.
Oh, lovely. Okay.
Oh.
This is called How to Make Powerful Speeches.
Okay.
And that became required reading in a lot of law schools. This is incidentally, if you ever write a book, this is a great idea. See if you can find a dean who likes your book.
Okay, I'm trying right now. Yeah, I'm working on it. I'm not trying, but we will talk. And are you on LinkedIn?
I'm on LinkedIn. I am on YouTube. I have podcasts. I'm on Twitter. So I would do a lot on YouTube. I would do a lot on podcasts. And I'm creating a new podcast that will start in the next month, which will be specifically about using stories for transformative purposes to inspire change.
Okay, so Eamon, I'm sure between us and others who are going to join you by the recording when it comes out, check your spam, check your junk mail, because there might be a few Americans hanging out there waiting for you to connect with us to run things. And I know we'll connect again and see you in different forms. And I want to say a heartfelt thank you for spending the time, the gift of time for us.
Yes. Yes.
And
Thank you so much.
And then, of course, I have to always give my little moments at the end here. So as I mentioned before, Dr. Elaine Gale joined us for a bit, and then she had to hop off. She had internet issues, but she'll be our speaker next month. We don't have an exact date. We're negotiating that, what's going to work. And then we do have a host of things happening coming up. We have a Dr. Elizabeth Stock, who's going to be our April speaker. In May, Artem is running his conference from his corner of cyberspace. So we're going to be part of that as our Stories in Lab. We'll participate with that conference, which will be quite exciting. And then, of course, there's the National Story Conference. And I'm delighted to say a colleague and a friend now, Jerome DeRoy, is going to be our pre-conference speaker and workshop facilitator. And that is happening at the end of June. So July, excuse me. So keep your ears and eyes open for those registration links and join us next month and tell us others. You gave us a host of ideas for speakers. So we have to go find those folks now and tell Eamon sent us. Kind of play with the truth a little bit, but you know, it'll work. So it's a delight. And any last words, parting quotes for yourself?
I've just got 4 words. If you remember nothing else, let your audience in.
Yes.
Honestly, that's transformative.
Yes.
Cheers. Cheers. And thank you so much. Look, sharing stories are a gift. And thank you for being part of this. We do appreciate it. Ciao.
Thank you so
Until
much.
next time, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eamon. I'll send
Sure.
you, check your emails. Okay, cheers. Bye-bye.